Excellent. I've got a few thumbs up, so thank you very much for that. Yes, just to introduce myself, I'm Garry Nelson. I'm the head of corporate affairs at All Clear and another brand you may or may not have heard of called Insure and Go. All Clear has been in this particular market for over 20 years. It does specialise in medical travel insurance only. We don't do other kinds of insurance. So this is our core market, medical conditions for people of any age. And we've been, as I said, doing that for over 20 years. So I think it's great to be able to be introduced to you. When Vicky and I first started speaking, I wasn't particularly familiar with some of the conditions that Vicky was talking through. She did explain to me that some of these are extremely rare. But having spent a little bit of time going through our quote journey and putting in some of the conditions, I was able to find these, and therefore, hopefully, in most instances, we'd be able to provide a quote, which I believe is an issue for some of you if you're not quite sure where to get cover from. I'm going to try and now move the dial a bit and start going through the presentation. So hopefully lots of nice colourful picture slides of places that we'd all quite like to get to, particularly as it's been non-stop raining for what feels like forever. So just a brief into All Clear, just to give you hopefully some reassurance and comfort that we know what we're talking about. There's then a slide about who we can cover. Then a slide around what I call the essential triangle, which goes into a little bit more about the relationship between customer, something like All Clear ourselves, we're a provider, and a very, very important player in the triangle is the underwriter. So, and how that relationship is critical to us being able to continue to offer cover. As I'm sure you've read and seen, there's been a whole host of issues and problems that everyone's had to face in the past few years. And that's created in itself some interesting cover appetites and non-cover appetites and product challenges for travel insurance, which I'll just give a little bit of a brief overview to. And then I'm going to go into a little bit more specific and try and show you, hopefully, that certainly some of the conditions that you encounter or you're living with are coverable. That's the good news. And in fact, you may very well be able to educate me in some of the things where it's been a little bit more challenging for me to find relevant references. And there are ways that we can do that. And I might put the question out there. I don't expect I think there's 20 plus people on the call. I don't expect everyone to just dive in and go, right, okay, this is what you do. But certainly afterwards, Vicky, if anyone can help us with some of those things, we can then share that around the group to just explain what you perhaps might need to do in certain scenarios if the condition is very, very unique, very, very rare. Just a very quick summary slide, but I think also, having spoken to Vicky and also seen the interaction, which is great to see from so many of you, I think there's some very, very important questions that people have got to ask, and I would want to spend time trying to answer as many of those as possible, as best I can, because they're clearly very relevant and issues that you're concerned about. So I think quite a bit of that will be covered off in today, and any that we can't, that I perhaps might need to look up and find out for you, then I'm happy to do that for you and come back to you separately if Vicky can share an email address or something, if that's okay, not breaking any confidences. So hopefully I can keep the momentum going, and I don't know that anyone's fallen asleep just yet. Yes, just as I said, we've been around since 2000. Our products are de facto rated. Our premium end products are 5-star de facto rated and have been for quite a few years. We are multi-award winning. We've won all sorts of awards over the past 2 or 3 years for customer service in particular, which we're very, very proud Um, you'll see their Trustpilot. As a specialist, we are the highest ranked Trustpilot specialist travel insurance provider. We're also the only travel insurance provider that's reader recommended by Good Housekeeping. And I'm very, very pleased to say, and this is quite hot off the press, is that Which, who you may all be familiar with as a UK consumer champion, have just completed an audit of 161 products for travel insurance, and only 6 products reached the benchmark for their best buy status. Very, very pleased to say that 2 of those are all clears, and another company called Insure and Go, 2 of theirs are those out of the 6. So hopefully that does give you reassurance. And a lot of that was based on not only just the product benefits, but the claims experience. We had a higher settlement of claims than many in the travel insurance and many in the specialist travel insurance area. And particularly in this, it does become very, very complex when people make claims, particularly when there are complex medical conditions, because very often it involves medical histories and can be quite a lengthy, drawn-out process, because it can also involve tens, even hundreds of thousands of pounds, and in the very, very odd instances, millions of pounds. So it's, it can be very, very quite complicated. So we operate in the UK. We do have a small office in Ireland. Our holding company is based in Gibraltar, and we also have an online and small offline centre in Australia. We are very, very keen on sort of using the data as effective as we can to price the risk, because of the huge amount of quotes that we've done over these 20 odd years. It's built up a huge amount of information, which just allows us, and I'll touch on this a bit more with this triangle that I spoke about earlier, it allows us to constantly be adjusting and readjusting pricing to suit the level of risk. So, for example, with what we've seen with the rising temperatures in the summer and forest fires and wildfires and all that sort of stuff, there's a different kind of risk. The cancellation risk becomes a lot higher. So prices have to be adjusted there. But then somebody who's traveling somewhere else and not affected by it, why should they be suffering in terms of price rises? So we try and do it by age. And when I talk about age, if you become 71 from 70, you don't then get treated exactly the same as an 85-year-old, i.e. anyone who over 70 gets a price hike as a loaded price. We deal with it individual age, so year by year by year. It's dealt with by destination quite clearly. Some destinations come with an awful lot more risk for us than others. No prizes for guessing which some they are when it involves medical. So this is a really key important in terms of trying to get our pricing correct for what we want to deliver as a fair price to our customers, and obviously to keep our underwriters happy that they're prepared to write some of these risks. Because the danger being, if you get it wrong, is that the underwriter says we're not prepared to write this business anymore to the US or for this pot of people. We pride ourselves on basically trying to make our cover as accessible to as many people as possible. We don't see necessarily people living with medical conditions, regardless of age, as a barrier if people want to still try and get away and they're fit enough and well enough to do that. You may not be aware of the British Insurance Brokers Association, but they are a well-known industry business that represents all the sort of high street brokers around Britain. We've been their approved provider for medical since 2011, and we also work very closely with Co-op Asda, Benetton, Telegraph, Aviva Diabetes UK, Age Code, Stroke Association. So we do have a lot of association with quite a few well-known charities, and our products are recommended to their members as solutions for some of the issues they face. I myself sit on the Access to Insurance Committee, which is BIVA's group that basically is there to try and influence Parliament as best it can, and also to make sure that, again, where possible, that we're adhering to the accessibility rules. We're not discriminating against people on the grounds of age and or medical condition. So the aim of that committee really is to try and raise awareness for situations like today, where people might not necessarily where they can find solutions for travel insurance. So there's a lot of work going on in that area at the moment. You may or may not have seen a report again, which is sponsored by which was around mental health and mental well-being and access to insurance. We've had quite a few discussions with that body that was set up by Martin Lewis to try and explain that there is cover out there, and not necessarily to automatically assume because you've got a stable mental health condition that would actually involve any kind of extra loading as a medical condition. If it's well stabilized, well medicated, and then in many instances there is no loading, and I don't know that they were necessarily aware of that. Anyway, we'll move swiftly on. That gives a little bit of background to us. So as I said, we can quote in everything I've seen, that we can quote in 99% of all scenarios. There isn't as such one condition in its own that we can't quote on. I haven't come across one where somebody says, I've got this condition, and we say, no, we don't want to cover that. Where we won't quote is where the combination of the condition or medical conditions people are living with, their age, the length of time that they want to go away for, and their destination. When all of those factors combine together, it can generate very, very large premiums, because basically it's saying the risk is huge to the insurer. And insurers don't really like covering what they think are surefire claims. They put in what we call an automatic acceptance threshold. Ours is very, very large. We can accept risks up to £6,000. Now, people will be like fairly gobsmacked, I would think, that somebody actually wants to pay that amount of money for a premium. But it could be a scenario where it might be the last time that they're able to visit their family, for example, and they live in Australia. And if they're able to afford it and want to afford it, what they don't want to do is obviously risk the kid's inheritance or medical bills because they have an issue, because they haven't got the proper travel insurance. So people do pay amounts of money to that extent. It does still surprise me, but it just gives you an idea of kind of the complexity of this and the kind of risks that we do carry. We've covered 90-odd-year-olds to America, one of whom ended up having a big substantial claim, but that's what we do. That's what we're here to do. So we don't just go, right, okay, well, we're not going to cover 90-year-olds because we've had one really bad claim in America. The medical screening suite that you would need to go into within our quote facility is run by a company called Verisk, that were previously known as Helix, and they basically operate 90% of the screening facilities for providers such as ourselves in the industry. We have our own bespoke version of Verisk, which allows us to rate differently to others, which is, again, as I said, is bespoke and it's unique to us. But that was set up by two medical practitioners, two GPs actually. So we have a really strong relationship with those guys. And if there are scenarios where we're not sure what the question set should be, or we can't identify the condition, we do speak to Verisk directly and say, have you come across this particular instance? What sort of questions should we be asked to be able to help facilitate a quote for this customer? And what they do a lot of is similar twos. So if they are in a group of questions whereby it may not be the condition directly that they identify, but the conditions that they want to, the answers that you want to know are very similar to a condition that you do know about, then I think that's one of the ways that can be dealt with. Other than that, we can refer it specifically to our underwriter and say, this is the condition. They may turn around and say, well, how do we rate for the risk? What questions do we need to ask? And I think I mentioned at the outset that I said that you may be able to help us in some of those, because that's what's happened before with other sort of fairly rare or unique conditions, is that it has actually prompted some kind of new question sets or validation that the questions being asked actually help to generate a plausible quote, if that makes sense. We deal with an awful lot of older people in our business, and whilst there's been a huge move to online, to mobile, to tablets, to desktops, we've actually reversed that trend, because we've actually invested in good old-fashioned people and good old-fashioned telephones, because we feel that an awful lot of people are vulnerable. They're not particularly that comfortable in the online environment, particularly when it comes to asking very personal, specific questions about medical conditions. That's not everyone by any means, but we do find that's hugely successful. And on an average, our call times are around 20 minutes, which is pretty long. It's one of the longest I know in this kind of area, and that gives you just an idea that the complexity of some of the calls that we deal with. But we take that time to make sure that the customer is as comfortable as possible with what they're being told and the questions that they're delivering, and that is hugely important that they do that. In terms of what Vicky and I initially have spoken about, I hope I'm not talking out of turn here, Vicky, but we've talked potentially around giving the charities that were featured on this call, if it's something that they want to go ahead with, what we call a generic telephone number, but also a specific quote code, which will allow us to identify where the call has come from. And if needs be, we can pay a small amount of commission that can go back into the charities to help for further research or marketing or whatever it is that you spend your money on. That facility does exist. I'm not here to sell that facility or anything like that. I'm here to try and just say that there are solutions and help here. But it is something that you may, if you're involved with the charities directly on the committees or whatever, it may be something as a group collective that you might want to progress. No pressure on that whatsoever, but it is feasible when we do it with many others as well. And of course, if people are individuals and just want to go to our public website rather than call us, perfectly able to do that as well, of course. I hope that helps. So I spoke about this triangle, and it's hugely important in trying to, I guess, educate people in terms of what we get quite often is people going, how on earth can the premium be more than the holiday? And as I said earlier, this is a very complex scenario. If you have an issue in the States and you end up staying one night in hospital in the States, the likely cost for that one night, even if you come out the next day, can run into, on an average, £10,000. A friend of ours broke a wrist on holiday with her stepsister that lives in California. The 15-minute private ambulance ride cost £4,500. So the States represents a particular problem for us, as does the Caribbean, Mexico, Canada, those sort of countries, but to a certain extent, even Spain, which is the most popular destination. People may not be aware that the average claims costs for Spain are twice they are in Portugal. They're next door neighbours. You would say there's no kind of logic in that. You know, to fly somebody home again from Portugal is roughly the same flight time as it is from Spain. Why would that be the case? And certainly if you're out on the street and trip over a paving stone, you'd likely end up in a public hospital and get treated the same as a local, which doesn't necessarily mean it's free, by the way, across Europe. But you'll get treated in exactly the same way as a local. But if you had a trip around a pool in a hotel and somebody called the front desk, there's a fair chance that you would end up going to a private facility and getting charged private medical fees. That's the way it tends to work. in Spain, which might well understand or explain why we see that differential. And other places in Europe that are similar to that are Cyprus, Greece, Turkey. We also count any of the countries that border the Mediterranean as Europe. Believe it or not, I know geographically they're not, so don't start shouting at me about my terrible geographic knowledge. So some of these destinations are quite popular. For example, Egypt has become very popular. Turkey's become very popular, particularly for autumn, winter sun. But you are most likely going to be ending up in private medical facilities in those areas. So therefore, the risk is higher and the price is higher. And other things like the journey time to get a transfer home again, say, for example, for a repatriation, which certainly isn't covered by the old EHIC or GHIC cards as they now are. Repatriation costs aren't covered. So that just gives you a little bit of an insight. But in order for us to operate and offer any cover at all, we need our underwriter is Zurich, which is, I'm sure, a name that you're familiar with. So it's a very robust, it's AAA rated. So it's one of the stronger brands. And we have a critical relationship with Zurich because they're the ones who actually pay the claims. So out of any premium, the premium, 20% goes to the government, as what you all know as VAT. It's called IPT, insurance premium tax, but it's what you and I know as VAT, and 20%. And insurance, travel insurance, at a rate of 20% is higher than any other form of travel insurance. We think that's grossly unfair, particularly with people who are elderly or particularly who've got medical conditions, because they're paying more anyway. And now they've been asked by the government to pay even more. We've been trying to lobby them about that for quite some time to reduce it. The fear within the industry, who don't get charged 20%, i.e. your motor and your home, is that the government go, yeah, you're quite right, it's very unfair. And all they do is put everything up to 20%. So your car, for example, is 11% IPT, travel insurance is 20%. So if we keep pestering too much, the likelihood is that the government will stick IPT up to 20% for everyone, which is fantastic news when you happen to pay over the odds anyway. I don't know how many of you are familiar with a term called loss ratio. This is very important for anyone operating our market, particularly if they get it wrong. Is that, let's say, for example, there's a premium of 120 quid. 20 quid of that goes to government as tax. That leaves £100, and 8% is agreed between both parties for us to keep a percentage, and the other percentage is sent across to Zurich as underwriting premium. You add up all your underwriting premium amounts across the year, and you hope that the claims that come in the other side don't get anywhere close to that underwriting premium. Otherwise, you've got a big problem. And what's happened in the past few years, particularly in COVID, particularly straight after COVID, is claims went through the roof, to be perfectly honest. So there were a lot of people who got their loss ratios in a horrible, horrible mess, and an awful lot of what we call capacity, i.e. underwriting capacity, exited the market, which then causes a bigger problem in that there's high demand. Everyone wanted to get away and have a holiday, but there wasn't anywhere near the same level of supply. And when that situation happens, prices go up. And prices have gone up, there's no two ways about it. I'm sure you recognise that across almost every facet of life in the last few years since COVID. And travel insurance is no different. And that's mainly as a result of the amount of claims that we had and the actual cost of settling those claims, because medical inflation went through the roof. And then we also pay, most medical bills around the world are paid in dollars. And if you all recall that the pound bombed against the dollar by about 20%. So, you know, so on and so forth but what we have been hugely, hugely successful, all clear, is in actually managing that process really, really well, and keeping our underwriters as happy as they can be. So we've been able to keep this triangle of providing good levels of cover to as many people as possible at what we think is the fairest price possible, based on the fact that we've got to keep our underwriter happy. And we've been able to deliver successful loss ratios to Zurich. If you don't, you're in big trouble. Either you're finished, or if, for example, America becomes too much of a problem, the customer says, I'm not paying that. And we certainly wouldn't want customers going to the States and not having travel insurance. But it could get to the stage where certain underwriters, it happens already, where certain underwriters for certain age and certain risks just won't cover US. We're one of the few that still cover for medical condition annuals that include America. There's an awful lot of people that won't. But as no prizes for guessing that they can be quite chunky in terms of premiums. So I hope that kind of explains how the pricing is derived. It's all about rating the risk to get your underwriter comfortable that they're prepared to write that risk and to still present a price to a customer that in their eyes is fair value. Everybody on this call has probably got a different interpretation of what they think is fair. To one person, it's too expensive. To another person, it's great value because they didn't think they get cover at all. So I'm not going to prejudge anybody on that. But hopefully the context of what I've been trying to explain to you is around that we can't operate unless we keep our underwriter happy. Neither can we operate if we don't sell enough policies to customers who think we're too expensive. So it's a very, very difficult balance to get, but we have been pretty successful in getting that balance right. And an awful lot of people, sadly, in the last few years, particularly after COVID, haven't. So it has made life more difficult, I think, generally. Hope that made sense. Yeah, so I did mention briefly that COVID had a big impact. Clearly, the biggest impact on us was the fact that we went from doing really, really well to 95% of people pretty much overnight didn't need travel insurance. So we not only had everybody not traveling anymore, but then everyone cancelled. And we had to refund them their money, understandably, and we did. We managed to survive. We actually bought Insura in that period as well, which has actually turned out to be a good acquisition. But we also saw when people started traveling again that you needed to have that reassurance that any kind of issue around COVID would be covered. I don't know if you remember some of the issues over cruising, for example, where whole ships were basically shut down and quarantined, that you needed to have specific proof of vaccines, etc., particularly for cruising. It went on much longer than the general holidays, and flying overseas didn't have quite anywhere near the restrictions that cruise did. But the other issue was for us in terms of trying to rate the risk is that nobody had really been able to get and see doctors or going into routine hospital appointments during COVID. And therefore, they were now traveling sort of almost like 2 years further downstream with not having those regular checkups. So we were still kind of almost accepting the risk as if it were 2 years ago. And people have got 2 years older. They've also not been for regular checkups. And, they're not doing anything wrong in declaring the fact that their position is where their position is. It's just they don't have that insight. And therefore, we were accepting risks in many instances for too cheap because the risk was actually far more real than that. And the other thing was a human thing. The fact is that they couldn't travel for a long time. They'd missed out on their holidays, which were critical for their enjoyment in life. And when they travelled again, they had a good time. They were determined to have a good time. So we saw a lot more people falling over. I won't go into the reasons why they might have fallen over, but they're all having a good time and fell over. Lots of different things, as you can well imagine, when people went, hurrah, we can all travel again. An awful lot of people went for quite more adventurous holidays, if I can put it that way. So people were falling over in America, but they were falling over in Yosemite Park and they were, walking down New York High Street because they wanted to do things differently. So we learned there was an awful lot of interesting things psychologically, socially that went on straight after COVID, which we've had to learn and understand. We've also had the backdrop, sadly, of the situation in Ukraine and planes having to divert because of most people traveling to the Far East, if they've done like myself, used to fly primarily over Russia. You can't do that anymore. So aircraft have to divert. They've gone on longer routes. That's pushed up the price of airline travel quite dramatically to the Far East. So there's all these different things that have made life a lot more difficult to try and get pricing right. Then we've seen, obviously, climate change has had a big impact as well. We all saw the forest fires and the huge temperatures that were, temperatures up in the 40s and 50s in Europe, which were, if you've got certain breathing conditions, the air quality was very, very poor. Then you had the forest fires, which did nothing at all for the air quality, of course. And everything was very, very kind of up in the air on that. There was a lot of things around cover, and Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office advising that, yeah, you could travel to Greece still, but it's not really advisable. And as soon as FCDO advises around not being able to travel, that becomes quite complicated. So for underwriters and for travellers, things have become an awful lot more complicated. That political unrest has sadly spread to the Middle East and some of the things that are going on there. And if you think through to Egypt, for example, if you look at a current heat map of Egypt in terms of where the FCDO say you can travel, where you can't, it's very complex. And could change quite quickly with one incident. This is affecting cruise liners, for example, that are going through the Suez Canal and down to places like Dubai where they regularly call in. So there's an awful lot going on that we're trying to get our head around, trying to advise customers as best we can and educate them. But for a customer, there's an awful lot of uncertainty and lack of knowledge as well. So there is a requirement, I think, for travel insurance to do a bit better here in terms of trying to keep up to date and try and inform people, because people have got these kind of holidays that they want to know that they've got cover for. But as I hope you get a feel for it, it is very complicated. It's changing almost daily, particularly with sort of the attacks on shipping, for example, that could shut that whole waterway off completely, and that does mess up an awful lot of crews.
Can I interrupt, Garry, just for a moment? This is really fascinating stuff, but I'm actually really conscious of time.
Right, okay.
We don't have a great deal of time left actually for the webinar, and I can see where you're going with this, but I wondered if maybe we could move towards the more practical finding, how to apply for health.
Sorry, I got carried away with stuff. Myself.
No, I know, and I completely understand it. But I'm so conscious of time, and we do only have an hour. So I just thought, no problem. If you don't mind, thank you.
Yeah, well, you'll see in the next slide. So looking through, as I did, I put in this scenario for a 50-year-old male with sideroblastic, I hope I said that, I spelt it wrong by the looks of it, sideroblastic anaemia, 1 week to Spain, annual multi-trip price we're also able to display there. And certainly from the average prices I see for that particular scenario, that is very much at the lower end of risk. So I was encouraged by that. I appreciate it's only one of the conditions. But that's suggesting to me that this particular condition is relatively stable. Would that be a fair comment? If it's for an annual trip, for example, to Europe, Spain is more expensive than some other areas of Europe. So that was an encouraging sign for me that the cover was available, and it was available at a relatively cheap price compared to our average. Our average annual policy, for example, is around £400, and our average single trip policy is around £150 to £180. So in terms of conditions that we do cover, this was at the lower end. So that was an encouraging sign to start with. I then sort of looked at something else. I mentioned marrow earlier, so then a different conditioning. I'll leave you to pronounce that, because that's quite a tricky one for me. But
we usually just call that PNH.
PNH, okay, thank you very much. That's very easy for me to pronounce. 1 week to Spain, top right, you can see the price in there. So again, no real change from the previous condition. And then I looked at 2 weeks, which include a cruise, and that obviously you can see straight away the jump there, because the fact that A, it's a cruise, and B, it's now in the States, that does represent much more of a risk. Admittedly, the platinum product showing but again, I said to you earlier, that's round about our average. So there's nothing there that's ringing alarm bells to me. But what was interesting and surprising, and I've asked internally, I haven't really got an answer yet, was that actually annual trip isn't available, which surprised me. And I will try and find a little bit more detail about why. I don't know if anyone's got any thoughts or insight, but I mean, I guess if you have a medical issue, is it likely to be that the care that you would need and the treatment that you would need very, very specialized? I'm not going to speculate. It just so we are able to cover a single trip, and if you went 2 or 3 times to America, then clearly we'd have to do 3 different single trips, which is unusual, because we would normally say, well, if you're going on 3 trips in a year, you're probably better having an annual. But there will be reasons for that. It's just that the pricing and the product people haven't let me know what those reasons are. So if I do get some information on that, I will obviously let Vicky know, and she can hopefully then inform you. In order for you to have a quote, you start to add a condition, and if you put in the condition, the conditions with the tick on the left-hand side show you the ones that straight away I got a recognised condition come up, and we were able to add it. There were questions there, and I'm sure if you're living with these conditions that are listed here, that you would know and recognise the questions and why those questions are being asked. I don't know if the conditions on the right are directly affecting anybody on the call today. If they are, again, just to try and give you some kind of reassurance that doesn't mean it's a no. What it means is when I typed those conditions in, I didn't get it recognised as a condition, which allowed me to progress. But when I say it doesn't mean we can't cover, these are maybe the incidents where the question sets for the conditions on the left are very similar to the conditions that you would, the questions that should be asked for these on the right. I don't know that. Perhaps somebody does, particularly for things like syndrome, where the word syndrome comes in and they are seen as conditions such as this. So again, we've also got the option of referring to Verisk, and we've also got the option of referring to Zurich for guidance. So I wouldn't want to go, sorry, relevant people, we can't cover you. It's a kind of, we would need to take this further, and that's where that speciality comes in. So if we ask these kind of questions, would you be able to answer those questions? And therefore we can then treat it as anemia or one of the other conditions on the left, for example, to get a quote. And providing, say, for example, Zurich is aware that the condition's actually this, but these are the questions they've asked, and they come to all that, then we can get that covered. So that's why it's an amber rather than a red. But come back to that and see, interesting. I've done that for Europe on that particular condition where we couldn't quote for the States. That would have been fine. You'd have got a cover for Europe. It seems to be worldwide, including worldwide, including America, and worldwide, excluding America. So for the Far East, Australia, those sort of places, it wouldn't quote on an annual, but it will quote in any scenario for Europe. Just a side. I won't run through this because hopefully I've covered all of that, and as Vicky's reminded me, I gabbled for England there. I guess it's over to questions, and I know there were quite a few beforehand, so I hope I can get rattled through them. But thank you very much, everyone, for your attendance and listening to me. I hope some of it helped. I hope some of it made sense, and I'll answer as many questions as I can within the time, Vicky.
Brilliant. Thank you, Garry. That's great. And would you be able to stop sharing your slides so that we can kind of see people and they can see us? That's better. It's always lovely to see all of your faces. So thank you very much for that, Garry. It's really interesting. And I think in particular, it's good to have an overview of how and why insurance is worked out and why quite often it's such a high cost. It was one thing that struck me, I think, from what you just said, really, is probably the importance of making a phone call and speaking to an actual human being when you have a condition that is as rare or as complex as these conditions, because you're not going to be able to get what you want from the computer, because it's, as we saw with so many of the conditions, they're not even recognized by your system. But what you're saying is that even though the condition, even though computer says no, a human will be able to actually ask the question and dig deeper and find the cover for you. So I think that was really good. I'm interested to know why the annual trip cover is not available. So I would like it if you could come back to us on that, please. And let me I see that we've got some questions coming into the chat now. So I'll take a look at those. And then maybe once everybody's had their question answered, we can go through the list of questions that was sent to us previously. So one person has said the spelling is, Schwachman. So, okay, yeah, that's quite a tricky one there. But thank you for that. This person has recently insured with you and covered their son who has SDS, which is the Swashman-Diamond syndrome, and your website did recognise it, and it was on the list of non-recognised ones. So perhaps it was the spelling. Perhaps it didn't pick it up because the spelling was incorrect. I wonder, but thank you for that. I think that was. Thank you.
That's good. That's good. I'm much happier that I've made a spelling mistake, but somebody's actually demonstrated they can get cover, and I can change the spelling mistake. But it's all around is immediacy, and whether there's that was planned or whether it was unplanned. If it was unplanned, obviously it becomes more of a risk. Obviously, something's happened with the condition. So therefore, there's an unplanned transfusion happened, and therefore the risk would, to me, represent a greater risk. Immunity might be challenged. The impact of it may not be as good as was hoped in terms of having that. So it's a rule around how stable is the condition, what treatment are you having, is this part of a normal kind of treatment pattern? And if all of those things are kind of normalised, if I can say that, it sounds very crude, but if it's normalised, then it's less of a risk. Anything out of the kind of ordinary or unplanned becomes more of a risk for the reasons outlined. Whether that actually impacts or changes, I don't, in every single scenario it can be different, but usually when something unplanned has happened, then there's usually a loading, an extra weighting, which is reflected in the price.
So, for example, if you were having regular monthly blood transfusions, for example, and they were scheduled in as part of your regular treatment and you were stable on that treatment, would that would be seen by the insurance company as less of a risk than somebody who was pulled in as an emergency case and needed blood transfusion?
This is my personal opinion. Obviously, I haven't gone in and done that in the system, but I think that is the case. And my view on this is where, a bit like the mental health situation we talked about before, the more stable and the more recognised the pattern, for example, the treatment pattern. One of the things I would flag is if somebody wanted to go away for a period of time and they were having to have a transfusion, for example, as part of their ongoing treatment, but that coincided with they must have that treatment while they're on holiday, obviously the travel insurance wouldn't cover that.
Sure.
We see that with dialysis, for example. I would think that it's better to call, because as you said before, you can have a stab at trying to answer the questions, but you'd have to find a condition that you believe to be as close. And at some stage I would have thought you'd have had to email in or ultimately end up calling in and just saying, look, I've answered this question set. I've answered it to the best of my ability. I just want to validate that what I put in here is acceptable given that I've got this particular condition. And again, that's one of those that we would probably then call Zurich and said, look, this is the questions that they've answered. The lady or the gentleman has explained that the condition question set is exactly the same as this particular condition, but wanted to be absolutely sure that you know that the condition that they're actually living with is this particular condition.
Yeah.
And is that okay? And that, you know, that gives them the reassurance. It certainly gives us the reassurance that everything's fine. Because what we're all trying to avoid here is any kind of confusion or doubt or misunderstanding when it comes in the event, praise be no, but in the event of a claim. That, you know, oh, they've actually answered the questions here on this particular condition and they don't have that condition, have this condition. And that's what we're trying to avoid from the outset, so that everyone's feeling they've got the full picture. It's been declared, it's written on their policy schedule, for example, and then there shouldn't be any confusion as and when, because it's all transparent.
Yeah, lovely. Okay, thank you. Someone's actually said here that sometimes, and this, I didn't know this either, this is really interesting, sometimes diamond black fan anemia is actually known as black fan diamond anemia. So that's another reason why that may have shown up on the not recognised by the conditions side, not recognised by the computer side. So that's another thing that I think will.
Yeah, I did say at the outset that hopefully some of the people on the call could educate me or us as a business. So, you know, what we're trying to do is find solutions here. And if I've spelt them wrong, forgive me for that. But if it means that the spelling mistakes resulted in the fact that we can actually quote that as my silly mistake, or there's a condition that I didn't know is actually known by something different, because it could be, see, these conditions can also be known as, there's been an awful lot of conditions over the years that we've dealt with which are also known as. So that's, you know, the more that we can get covered, the happier I'll be.
Absolutely.
For children under the age of 18, you would need to have adults on the policy. But if they've got no medical conditions, that, you know, that won't be any kind of issue. But we can't cover children on their own with no adult named on the policy. This is a really important point. I want to make it clear to people that if they've got other travel insurance policies, but just say, for example, want to cover the individual involved with a medical condition, if they've got, say, for example, bank or credit card cover, please ensure that you notify your travel insurance provider that you are traveling with somebody with a medical condition. Because if the reason for you cancelling the holiday is down to the fact that you're traveling with somebody with a medical condition, there are instances where your particular company won't pay out because you haven't informed them. So you need to get validation. So I'm not here to say, okay, stick everybody on the all clear policy. We do sell something called travelling companion cover, which allows you for a small add-on premium to actually mitigate that risk, so that we would actually pay out if you took that cover out. But an awful lot of people do have bank or credit card travel insurance as part of a, you know, package of benefits. But this is something that an awful lot of people are not aware of when it actually comes to you are traveling with somebody with a medical condition. So I hope that message has been heard and that they do check that out. No, it's more for the benefit of the charity, to be perfectly honest. It's just something that we do with partners to, because usually people that support their charity part, you know, their own charities that they're close to their heart, the fact that they're actually making a small contribution into those charities, they usually feel quite comfortable with, for example. They'd rather be doing that than just basically, but it's entirely up to the individual, really, whether they do or they don't. It's just, I'm saying, it is potentially an option that we can explore if there's enough interest, and the benefit really is going back into the charity, albeit on a small level. But it's at least something that might help with, I don't know, creating messaging or research or anything like that.
Yeah.
That's what we do with diabetes, is what we do with stroke, is what we do with Motability, that we put money back into their pot to spend on research. I think is generally what they use.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I'm wondering if it's not that, it's just saying that they don't offer the annual medical cover for aplastic anemia on your slide.
Yeah,
Is that what the asterisk meant?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, that means these asterisks next to the aplastic anemia means that they offer it as an individual policy for an individual trip, but not for an annual policy. But it doesn't need to be validated by Verisk.
Yeah, it will be more expensive. Unfortunately, we all know that when we buy a car when we're 17, we're going to pay far more than somebody who's 35, 40. We all know the reasons for that. And sadly, none of us can deny the fact that as we all get older, we're all more likely to have medical conditions. We're more likely to be, if we do have a problem, we're more likely to be more impacted than a younger person. So, but what I'm saying to you is when you get to a certain age, and an awful lot of insurers do this, particularly banks and credit cards, at 70, they'll actually stop offering cover altogether. What we do is we put a small loading on for every year you get older. So there will be a difference, but it's not astronomically different. But every instance is different. So it's not just about your age, it's about what your medical condition is. It's whether you're going on a single trip or an annual. It's about where you're traveling to. It's how long your trip may be. You might be going on a single trip to one country for 2 months as opposed to a week. So everything's different, but your question's right. You will be paying more than a 50-year-old, but given the given the level of risk on that particular 50-year-old quote, I wouldn't expect to see that hugely different in terms of how much is it going to be. It's not something that you'll go, well, I can't afford that, because there's 25 years age difference. You don't need to demonstrate this is my treatment. I don't think you ask, can you tell us what your treatment plan is? You get the question set is fairly set, should I say? And this is where the complexity comes in, because I know, as you explained to me, that many of the instances here are extremely rare, which it kind of takes it out of the normal kind of sphere that we deal with. But as I tried to explain before, the fact that so many of these conditions are coverable and that the question sets are set, it's around asking around, have you had a transfusion? Have you had a bone marrow transplant? Have any instances occurred? The only way that really people can get sort of kind of familiar and know whether it's right or wrong in terms of the question set is actually by going in and actually running quotes. And people are perfectly able to do that, just to go in and look at the website and just see what the question sets are. Whatever you do, once you get to a point of getting a quote, then bail out. But at least you get familiar with the question sets. And if there are then questions around, why do you ask this? It doesn't seem to be able to take in my particular instance. That's when I'd say you probably need to then take the route of calling somebody to try and get that expert. And I said, some of these instances are extremely rare, and therefore many of our operators, agents won't have come across scenarios before. And therefore they'll need to refer, and we would then need to speak to somebody who's perhaps got the expertise, which is likely to be at Verisk, I would suggest, or Zurich.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But we won't abandon you, say, oh, sorry, no, we don't know anything about this. That's the last thing we'll do. We'll just actually go and make some inquiries and then perhaps call back and so on and so forth. But in terms of specific treatment plans, we don't ask, can you detail here, please, what your specific treatment plan is? I think the risk there is around cancellation.
Yeah.
The point that he's making there, and it depends again whether you're going on a luxury cruise or how far ahead that you're basically going. Clearly, the other thing to think about is if you've decided, right, I really feel like I need a break, and I'm going to go to Spain next week, and there's a week and you're in a good place and not expecting any kind of turmoil, with our policies, you can actually exclude cancellation because you've only got a week of exposure. And you can think, well, actually, there's no real chance of me anything happening in a week. So I'll bring the price down because I can exclude cancellation. So that's one option you can do, which kind of flies a little bit in the wind of what Martin's advising there, and I would definitely not go against Martin. But I think what he's thinking about is the further out the trip, but the more, depends again when you're liable to outlay of money. In some instances, you pay a deposit, don't you? So your risk is relatively small, and then as you get closer to actually paying the full balance, and then you're exposed to the full risk, that's when you definitely want to make sure you've got cancellation cover in. Because cruising is a great example of that. And what cruises have done, have made their refund policies very much better. So their exposure is reduced, your exposure is reduced the longer out that you actually cancel. But as closer you get to paying that cruise and the full balance and paying that full balance, then the greater the risk. So I would definitely recommend, John, that you get that cancellation cover for instances like that.
Yeah.
No, if you're going on a walk down the Camino, the fact that you're going on a walk, that's not an issue. If you were to bungee jump and you're 87, then that would have an impact on the risk rating. So there's a list of hazardous sports that you can and can't do. What impacts pricing is where you're going. For example, walking in Yosemite Park as opposed to the Camino, it's the fact that it's in America rather than Spain or Portugal that impacts that price. It's the destination. And of course, the duration of the trip. That's what impacts the price, allied to the age and the medical conditions declared. Yeah. So virtually every instance that we deal with is fairly unique, even though your cases are particularly unique. Everybody's case is fairly unique. So when we get asked generic questions of how much is it likely to cost to go to Spain for a week, I don't know is the answer to that, because I don't know what risk I'm being asked to require to cover. What I'd say is if you're young, fit and healthy, buy that policy online, because there's no point calling the contact centre when your call is going to last 2 seconds, and you can do that very easy online, and that's where probably youngsters particularly would rather be. So as you can imagine, with 20-minute length calls, ours are far more complex. So that's why we make them bespoke. That's why we offer the contact centre, because we are dealing with so many different scenarios.
Yeah, thank you, Garry.
It works on cohorts really, and also the level of claims. Somebody can take out a policy for 40 quid and they can run a claim up that can run into millions. And if that's tied to one condition, is that fair that then impacts everybody who's got that condition? Because they're not the ones that had a condition, but it will do, unfortunately, because what you take is the premium for that condition, the claim, and price will go up for that particular condition. But because of the scale of our size, we're able to mitigate that. But likewise, if you do make a claim, there isn't a red flag on your name, and your cost won't be impacted whatsoever if you came back to us 6 months later just because you made a claim. So you could have a huge claim, you could have really severely hit our loss ratio figure, but you don't get punished for that in any way, shape or form. It just doesn't work in the same way that car insurance does, I'm afraid. It's whether that's peculiar to travel insurance, I don't know, but that's the way it works. We base it around the fact that it works in cohorts, it's around age factors, it's around destinations. And actually, if nothing much has changed and you don't have too much variance in your medical condition, then the price doesn't vary that much either. But what can make it vary is if you decide to go from a single trip to an annual, if you can. What does change is as you get older, each year you get a small increase. What does change is if you're going 1 year, you go for an annual trip that includes Europe, then you decide you're going to go to family in Australia, then you've changed from an annual trip Europe to annual worldwide excluding USA, and therefore the price will go up quite considerably.
Thank you. Yeah, that's interesting. It's not something I'd ever thought about, but you know, with your car insurance, if you do claim on them the next year, your car insurance shoots. So it's good to know that isn't the case with this, with the health travel insurance that you offer.
I mean, we've all got no claims discounts, but I mean, I've had a broken windscreen and I've had another, totally not my fault, somebody hit the back of me, and I still found that my insurance went up quite considerably. Now, I don't know that's whether the fact that that's going up anyway, or the fact that no claims discount is not kind of all it's made up to be. But, you know, I'm not here to denigrate any other forms of insurance. I'm just here to answer that particular question, is that we don't offer no claims discounts, and neither do we punish people if they do make a claim. Well, first and foremost, are you planning to travel together? Because if you're not, then do separate ones. But if you are traveling together, then you can add individuals. You can add up to 10 people on one of our policies. But if you do generally travel together, then and you've both got conditions, then it would make sense to have it tied to one policy. Just because, in theory, it could save you time. That's not a rule. That's not an instruction. That's not kind of saying that's what you have to do. It's your personal choice that you could go here for that one and one over there for another. You know, it's basically you can do what you want in that one. But in terms of kind of facilitating your policy into one place, and that you can both feel comfort and reassured that you've got a good level of cover, then I would recommend that you stick yourselves both on the same policy.
Is that the best way to do it?
Yeah. So just for everybody's purpose here, we would never, ever advocate anyone taking a travel insurance policy and they leave certain things off, okay? Particularly if they're kind of related. So my advice is, if you've got a set of conditions, please declare them. We deal with cases of, with 13, 14 conditions added, people travel with. So, and there's no limit on that, by the way. I think the most I've seen is 13 or 14. So 5 isn't too bad. But it depends what the severity is and what the condition is, obviously. But please don't leave anything off, and please don't think, right, I'll try and get that one covered over there and that one covered over there, because travel insurance really doesn't work that way. You have to make sure that you've declared the conditions, so that if there's any instance of, right, somebody needs to make a claim, there's no ambiguity. There's no kind of, oh yeah, but the fact that they've declared that means that this has happened, and therefore if they'd have declared that, that's fine, we'd have covered it. But they've basically, by not declaring it, reduced the price to try and get the price lower, and now they're expecting us to pay up full on the claim. So there are policies out there that basically say we will cover you, but not for these conditions. And we don't think that's the right way to go. I'm not criticising those brands for doing that. We don't think that's the right way to go at all, because what you don't want is ambiguity. And when it comes to the event of a claim, particularly, for example, if you're going to America, where claims costs are absolutely through the Richter scale. So I wouldn't advocate that. So I hope that helps. I hope that's made it clear, but please do declare everything. And I know it can be a bit of a pain in the so.
Yeah, the pain in the proverbial.
Right, there is a clear definition right early on our website, and I've also looked in the policy wording this afternoon, and I'm trying to get this right. You've got to have lived in the UK for a minimum of 6 months, and you need to be registered with a GP general practice. So if those boxes are ticked and they've got a permanent address in the UK, sorry, that's the other thing. They've got a permanent address. Both of those apply. I think I can apply. So that should be a thumbs up.
Thank you so much, Garry.
If you do, for example, call in, can you just make sure that you clarify that when they're asked, because they'll obviously recognise a little bit of an accent there, and they'll probably say, are you a are you a UK citizen? Are you a UK resident? Not citizen, UK resident, and they're the criteria. Because we get a lot of people ask us who live, for example, in Spain that are UK passport holders, but we can't cover them because they're actually based in Spain. So
Oh,
we do our travel from the UK, and so your outbound journey and your return journey have to start and finish in the UK. No, as again, if as long as the previous case, as long as she fulfills that criteria about UK residency, then there's no issue there at all. There's been a lot of really good questions, but that's a really important question that's been asked there, because it does happen a lot. And absolutely, yes, please. Even if there's a change in medication, I would advise you to let us know. Just because, again, it's all about in some instances when you tell us there's no change, that's just thank you very much for letting us know. We'll add that to your notes. Depends what it is. But if there's a significant change, then there could be, in theory, an additional premium to pay. Mm. That's why we need to know, because circumstances have changed between you taking a policy out and travelling, and we need to understand whether those circumstances can affect the level of risk that we're being asked to cater for. So it's a really important point.
Is there any danger if you don't inform the insurance company that you've had an additional diagnosis, or you've had your treatment has changed or something like that? Is there any danger then that the insurance company won't pay out because you didn't give them that information?
There is a danger. Depends again what the level of intent was. I'll put it that way. It's not an intentional thing, but just say, for example, it's a minor medication that has changed it from this to this, that may be inadvertent and it wouldn't really have changed the outcome. But obviously, if it's I've got these conditions, now I've developed this condition which may be or maybe not associated, and you haven't told us, and then there's a significant claim which is a direct result of that, then that can have a major bearing. And again, it's that ambiguity that we're trying to avoid in the event of a claim.
Can I ask something? What if we're being investigated for something, but we're not sure about the diagnosis yet?
Yeah, we're really being inundated with this, and this is partly to do with what's happened since COVID, to be perfectly honest. And again, what happens in these situations, that's basically an undiagnosed condition. So you're waiting to find out what the issue is, but you don't know, and that's through no fault of your own, but you've got a trip coming up. So you do need to let us know that you're undergoing some investigation, but you don't know what the outcome is. What we will say to you is we will. So some insurers will basically pull your cover at this point because they don't know what they're covering. We don't. We'll cover you for everything that you've declared so far that we know about. What we will say to you is, for the condition that is undiagnosed at the moment that we don't know about, if subsequently there is a claim as a result of that undiagnosed condition, then you won't be covered for that situation. Okay. Mm-hmm. So then it is down to the individual to decide, actually, I've got, entirely unrelated, it feels like I might need I've tweaked my cartilage in my knee, and I think it might be that I need a knee op. You'll go, actually, that's not really going to be an issue for me, but it could be something that you suspect might be a lot more serious than that. And then it's down to the individual to make that decision about whether they want to carry that risk or not carry that risk. And if you, as a result of that, say, I can't afford to take that risk, what we would then do is we would say, well, if you want to, you can cancel the policy and we'll give you a part refund. But we do cover an awful lot of people at the moment who are travelling with undiagnosed conditions because they've not been able to get to see a GP, they've not been able to have surgery, for example, or they've not been able to get to see a consultant. So that's just a byproduct of the last few years. So we've seen a huge jump in the number of people that are asking that question, B, and secondly, that are taking out the cover, but they're determining themselves individually what the nature of the problem is. You know, they know it's only something minor. It's not a worry. I'm comfortable taking that risk. Yeah, no, it could be something actually a lot worse than that. And, you know, and I'm going to America, that's not really worth taking that risk. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. Yeah,
I am pleased to be able to say that we at least offer that choice. As I said, and again, not denigrating anybody, there's the reasons why they do it. But in many instances, we know that insurers will just go, I'm pulling cover altogether now because you've got an undiagnosed condition. All right.
Yeah.